In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and white picket fences define the scenery, life moved at a predictable pace for Michael and his older sister, Rachel. Michael, a soft-spoken man in his early 30s, had faced more challenges than most people could imagine. 2 years earlier, a devastating car accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. Life as he knew it changed overnight. Simple tasks like getting out of bed or moving around the house now required careful planning and reliance on a motorized wheelchair. Despite these hardships, Michael remained resilient, determined to live independently in the home he loved. Rachel, on the other hand, was a force of nature. A well-known national TV anchor, she spent her days chasing stories that mattered, exposing corruption, giving voice to the voiceless, and holding powerful people accountable. Her career demanded long hours and constant travel, but she always made time for Michael. She ensured his needs were met, from hiring caregivers to making sure his home was accessible. The siblings shared an unbreakable bond, built on mutual respect and love. To Rachel, Michael wasn't just her brother. He was her family, her responsibility, and her motivation to keep fighting for justice in the world. Their home was modest, but filled with warmth. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall oak trees that shaded the driveway. After Michael's accident, Rachel worked tirelessly to make the house wheelchair-friendly. One of the biggest changes was the installation of a sturdy wooden ramp at the front door. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it served its purpose perfectly, allowing Michael to come and go as he pleased. For him, the ramp symbolized freedom, a way to reclaim some control over his life after everything had been taken away. But peace in their little corner of the world didn't last forever. Trouble began brewing when the Homeowners Association, HOA, sent them a letter. At first, it seemed harmless enough, a notice about upcoming community events and reminders about neighborhood rules. But buried deep within the fine print was something alarming. A clause stating that all exterior modifications to homes needed prior approval from the HOA board. The ramp, they claimed, had never received such approval and was therefore non-compliant. Michael tried not to worry too much. He figured it was just a misunderstanding, something that could be cleared up with a phone call or a meeting. But when he reached out to the HOA, the response was anything but helpful. The board members dismissed his concerns, saying the ramp was unsightly and detracted from the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. They insisted it had to go, offering vague promises to review the situation later. In the meantime, they suggested Michael find alternative ways to enter and exit his home, a suggestion that felt absurd given his condition. Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. The HOA refused to budge, leaving Michael trapped in limbo. Every time he looked at the ramp, he felt a pang of frustration mixed with helplessness. How could something so essential to his independence be treated as expendable? And why did the HOA care more about appearances than whether someone could live comfortably in their own home? Unbeknownst to Michael, this was only the beginning of a battle that would test their resolve and reveal just how far Rachel was willing to go to protect her brother. As the tension simmered beneath the surface, neither sibling realized how much their lives were about to change, or how many people would soon take notice of their fight. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves as Michael prepared for his day. He had a routine he followed religiously: wake up early, make breakfast with the help of adaptive tools in the kitchen, and then head outside to enjoy some fresh air before starting work on his freelance graphic design projects. But that particular morning, something felt off. As Michael approached the front door, he noticed something unusual: a shiny new lock hanging ominously on the gate leading to his ramp. At first, he thought it might be a mistake. Maybe a neighbor accidentally placed it there, or someone from the HOA was doing maintenance and forgot to remove it. But as he examined it closer, reality sank in. The lock was sturdy, clearly installed with intention. And worse, there was no note, no explanation, just the cold, unyielding metal blocking his way. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, gripping the handlebars of his wheelchair tightly. His heart sank as he realized what this meant. Without access to the ramp, he was effectively trapped inside his own home. Panic began to creep in. How could this happen? Who would do this to him? He immediately called the HOA office, hoping for answers. The person who answered sounded indifferent, barely listening as Michael explained the situation. "We've sent you multiple notices about the ramp," the voice said curtly. "It's against our guidelines. You'll need to submit a formal application if you want approval." Michael tried to argue, explaining that the ramp wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity. But the response was dismissive. "Those are the rules," the representative said flatly before ending the call. Frustrated and feeling more isolated than ever, Michael reached out to Rachel. She was out of town covering a major news story, but when she heard her brother's voice trembling over the phone, she knew something was seriously wrong. "They locked me in," Michael said, his tone a mix of anger and despair. "I can't even leave my house." Rachel listened intently, her jaw tightening with every word. She assured him she'd handle it. But deep down, she was seething. How dare they treat her brother this way? Didn't they understand how vital the ramp was to his daily life? Over the next few days, Michael tried everything he could think of to resolve the issue. He emailed the HOA board members, pleading his case and providing documentation showing the ramp complied with disability accessibility laws. He even spoke to a few neighbors, hoping they might intervene on his behalf. Some expressed sympathy, but none were willing to challenge the HOA directly. The fear of retaliation hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew how the board operated. Rules were enforced inconsistently, often targeting those least able to fight back. Meanwhile, Michael's frustration grew. Each day felt like a prison sentence. He couldn't go grocery shopping, visit friends, or even take a simple walk around the block. The once familiar walls of his home started to feel suffocating. Even small tasks became monumental challenges without the ability to leave freely. He spent hours staring out the window, watching other residents come and go, wondering why his basic right to mobility had been stripped away so callously. As the days dragged on, Michael began to lose hope. The HOA board remained unmoved by his appeals, offering vague promises of reviewing his case, but taking no concrete action. It was as though they expected him to simply accept their decision and move on. But Michael refused to give up. He clung to the belief that justice would prevail eventually, even if he didn't know how or when. Little did he realize that help was already on the way, thanks to his fiercely determined sister, who was about to turn this personal injustice into a national conversation. When Rachel returned home from her work trip, she didn't waste a single moment. She drove straight to Michael's house, her mind racing with anger and determination. The sight of the lock on the gate made her blood boil. Up close, it looked even more imposing, cold, heavy, and completely unnecessary. She knelt beside it, examining it as if trying to understand how anyone could justify such a cruel act. When she finally stood up, her expression was one of steely resolve. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was about dignity, fairness, and standing up to those who thought they were untouchable. Rachel wasted no time confronting the HOA board. She requested an emergency meeting, presenting herself as calm and professional despite the storm brewing inside her. Sitting across from the board members in their sterile conference room, she laid out her case with precision. She brought printed copies of federal and state laws protecting people with disabilities, along with photos of Michael's ramp and letters from doctors confirming his need for it. "This isn't just a convenience," she said firmly, her voice steady but laced with authority. "It's a lifeline. Without it, my brother is trapped in his own home." But instead of listening, the board members exchanged smug glances, their body language dismissive. One of them, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, leaned back in his chair and sighed dramatically. "We understand your concerns," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But we have standards to uphold. The neighborhood has a certain aesthetic, and the ramp, well, it doesn't fit." Another member chimed in, suggesting that Michael could find another solution. as though alternatives existed for someone in his condition. Rachel felt her patience wearing thin, but she refused to let them see her frustration. Instead, she pressed harder. "You're telling me," she said, leaning forward slightly, "that you value the aesthetic of this neighborhood over my brother's ability to leave his house, over his basic human rights." Her word hung in the air, sharp and innumerable. For a brief second, there was silence. Then the same man shrugged nonchalantly. "Rules are rules," he muttered, flipping through papers as if bored. That was the moment Rachel realized these people had no intention of budging. They underestimated her, thinking she was just another resident complaining about trivial matters. What they didn't know, and what became glaringly obvious in that room, was that Rachel wasn't just any resident. She was a seasoned journalist who had spent years holding powerful institutions accountable. If they thought she would back down, they were sorely mistaken. As she left the meeting, Rachel's mind was already working overtime. She knew legal battles could drag on for months, maybe even years, and Michael didn't have that kind of time. No, this required a different approach, one that played to her strengths. She decided to use her platform to shine a light on the injustice. After all, stories like this were exactly why she became a journalist in the first place. The HOA might not care about Michael or his ramp, but the public would. And once the public got involved, things tended to change quickly. Back at Michael's house, Rachel found him sitting by the window, staring outside. He looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained. Seeing him like that broke her heart, but it also fueled her determination. "Don't worry, Mike," she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're going to fix this, I promise." Michael nodded weakly, trusting his sister implicitly. But Rachel wasn't just promising him. She was promising herself. She wouldn't rest until justice was served, not just for Michael, but for anyone else who might face similar treatment in the future. Over the next few days, Rachel began laying the groundwork for her plan. She reached out to disability advocacy groups, legal experts, and trusted colleagues in the media. She documented every detail of the situation, from the initial letter to the locked gate, ensuring she had a solid foundation for whatever came next. As she worked tirelessly behind the scenes, one thing became clear. The HOA had picked the wrong family to mess with. Little did they know, their actions were about to spark a much larger conversation, one that would put them squarely in the spotlight. Rachel wasn't one to sit back and wait for change to happen. She was the kind of person who made things move. With her mind set on exposing the HOA's unfair treatment of Michael, she dove headfirst into gathering evidence that would leave no room for doubt about the injustice at play. Her first step was talking to the neighbors, many of whom had witnessed the growing tension between Michael and the HOA, but were too afraid to speak up. Rachel approached them with warmth and sincerity, assuring them that their voices mattered. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, hesitated at first. "I don't want any trouble," she said, glancing nervously toward the HOA's main office down the street. But as Rachel explained how this wasn't just about Michael, it was about fairness and protecting everyone in the community, Mrs. Peterson opened up. "It's not right," she admitted softly. "They've been targeting people like Michael for years. It's always the ones who can't fight back." She went on to share stories of other residents who had faced similar issues. A single mother fined excessively for painting her door a different color, an elderly man pressured to remove a handrail near his steps because it didn't match the neighborhood's look. These accounts painted a troubling picture of an HOA more concerned with appearances than compassion. Armed with these testimonials, Rachel reached out to legal experts specializing in housing discrimination. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers, poring over documents and laws designed to protect individuals with disabilities. The more she learned, the clearer it became that the HOA was violating not only federal disability rights laws, but also basic principles of human decency. One lawyer, impressed by Rachel's dedication, agreed to help pro bono. "This is exactly the kind of case we need to highlight," he told her. If we let this slide, it sets a dangerous precedent. But Rachel didn't stop there. She contacted local advocacy groups for people with disabilities, knowing they could provide valuable insight and support. A representative from one organization, a passionate advocate named Lisa, immediately offered to collaborate. Together, they crafted a strategy to bring attention to Michael's situation, while also addressing broader systemic problems. Lisa shared resources, including data on how often disabled individuals face discrimination in housing, which Rachel planned to use to bolster her argument. As the pieces fell into place, Rachel began documenting everything meticulously. She took photos of the locked gate, saved copies of every email and letter exchanged with the HOA, and recorded conversations, where legally allowed, to ensure she had undeniable proof of their refusal to cooperate. Every detail mattered, and Rachel treated this investigation like one of her high-profile news stories. She knew that when the truth came out, it needed to be irrefutable. The turning point came when Rachel decided to involve her network of journalist colleagues. She reached out to trusted contacts in both local and national media, sharing Michael's story and the evidence she'd gathered. At first, some were hesitant, fearing backlash or legal repercussions. But Rachel's reputation preceded her. She was known for being thorough, ethical, and relentless. Slowly but surely, interest grew. Reporters began asking questions, digging deeper into the HOA's history, and uncovering patterns of discriminatory behavior that extended far beyond Michael's case. By the time Rachel felt ready to take the next step, she had built a rock-solid foundation. She had testimonies from neighbors, expert opinions from lawyers and advocates, and mounting public curiosity thanks to whispers spreading through the media. The HOA still hadn't budged, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. They continued to insist that their actions were justified, clinging stubbornly to their so-called standards. But Rachel knew better. This wasn't about standards. It was about power, and she was determined to show the world what happened when that power was misused. With all her preparations complete, Rachel sat down one evening with Michael. "We're ready," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this." Michael looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. He trusted his sister completely, knowing she wouldn't stop until justice was served. And as Rachel prepared to take the fight public, she couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The HOA had underestimated her, and soon they would realize just how big a mistake that had been. Rachel knew that timing was everything. She had gathered all the evidence, built a compelling case, and rallied support from advocates and journalists. Now, it was time to bring Michael's story to the world. As a national TV anchor, she had access to one of the most powerful platforms imaginable, a primetime news segment watched by millions. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was her chance to shine a spotlight on the injustice her brother faced and hold the HOA accountable in front of the entire country. The day of the broadcast arrived, and Rachel felt a mix of nerves and determination. She sat at the anchor desk, calm and composed as always, but inside, her heart raced. When the producer gave her the signal, she turned to the camera with a look of quiet resolve. "Tonight," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "we're sharing a deeply personal story, one that hits close to home for me. It's about my brother, Michael, and how his life has been disrupted by the very people who are supposed to protect our community." As images of Michael's house appeared on screen, the locked gate, the ramp, and Michael sitting by the window, Rachel recounted the events leading up to this moment. She explained how the HOA had labeled the ramp unsightly and refused to budge despite clear evidence that it was essential for Michael's independence. Her words were measured, but there was no mistaking the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "This isn't just about aesthetics," she said firmly. "It's about whether someone like my brother has the right to live with dignity in his own home." To drive her point home, Rachel played clips from interviews with neighbors who spoke candidly about the HOA's discriminatory practices. Mrs. Peterson appeared on screen, her voice trembling as she described how other vulnerable residents had been targeted. Legal experts followed, explaining the laws the HOA was violating and emphasizing the importance of accessibility rights. The segment also included footage of Lisa, the disability advocate, passionately arguing that cases like Michael's highlighted systemic issues affecting countless individuals across the country. By the time the segment ended, social media was ablaze. Viewers flooded Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook with messages of outrage and support. Hashtags like #UnlockMichael, #HOA abuse, and #accessibilityforall began trending nationwide. People shared their own stories of battling HOAs or facing discrimination because of disabilities. Some posted photos of ramps, handrails, and other modifications they relied on daily, tagging Rachel and demanding change. Even celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying Michael's story to their massive followings. Back at the HOA office, phones rang nonstop. Calls poured in from angry viewers accusing the board of cruelty and ignorance. Emails filled their inbox, many containing harsh criticism and calls for accountability. For the first time, the board members realized they were under intense scrutiny, not just locally, but nationally. Their attempts to brush off the issue as a minor dispute suddenly seemed woefully inadequate in the face of widespread condemnation. Meanwhile, Michael watched the segment from his living room, feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was grateful for Rachel's unwavering support and the outpouring of kindness from strangers. On the other, he couldn't help but feel exposed, knowing his private struggles were now public knowledge. But when he saw the hashtags trending online and read comments from people saying they stood with him, a sense of hope began to grow. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Rachel, too, felt a surge of vindication. Seeing the public rally behind Michael validated everything she'd worked so hard for. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. Public pressure was powerful, but lasting change required more than awareness. It required action. With the momentum building, Rachel decided to escalate further. She reached out to lawmakers, urging them to investigate the HOA's practices and strengthen protections for people with disabilities. She also contacted advocacy organizations to explore ways to push for policy reforms at a larger scale. As the days passed, the HOA found itself increasingly isolated. Local news outlets picked up the story, adding fuel to the fire. Advertisers who supported community events sponsored by the HOA began pulling out, citing reputational concerns. Board members scrambled to respond, issuing vague statements about reviewing policies and valuing diversity. But the damage was done. They had underestimated Rachel. And now, they were paying the price. The pressure on the HOA was mounting by the hour. What had started as a private dispute between Michael and the board had exploded into a national conversation, thanks to Rachel's relentless pursuit of justice. The public outcry was impossible to ignore. Social media campaigns, angry phone calls, and even petitions demanding accountability left the HOA scrambling to contain the fallout. But it wasn't just public opinion that worried them anymore. Legal threats loomed large on the horizon. Rachel wasted no time escalating the fight. With the help of lawyers, she filed a formal complaint against the HOA, accusing them of violating the Fair Housing Act, a federal law designed to protect individuals with disabilities from discrimination. The lawsuit alleged that the HOA's actions not only infringed upon Michael's rights, but also set a dangerous precedent for others in similar situations. Legal experts weighed in, agreeing that the case was strong and could lead to significant consequences for the HOA if they lost. Faced with the prospect of costly litigation and potential fines, cracks began to form within the board. Behind closed doors, the HOA members were panicking. Some argued that they should settle quickly before things got worse, while others clung stubbornly to their belief that they were upholding standards. Tensions ran high during emergency meetings, where heated arguments broke out over how to respond. One member suggested issuing another vague apology, hoping it would placate the public. Another proposed removing the lock quietly and pretending nothing happened. But Rachel was watching every move, ready to expose any attempt to sweep the issue under the rug. Finally, after days of deliberation and mounting pressure, the HOA caved. They issued a public statement acknowledging their mistake and apologizing for their treatment of Michael. "We regret the distress caused to Mr. Michael and his family," the statement read. "Our intention was never to discriminate or cause harm, and we are taking immediate steps to rectify the situation." True to their word, workers arrived at Michael's house the very next day to remove the lock and ensure the ramp remained untouched. For the first time in weeks, Michael could finally leave his home without obstruction. But Rachel wasn't satisfied with just an apology and a removed lock. She pushed further, demanding systemic changes to prevent such incidents from happening again. Under intense scrutiny, the HOA agreed to revise its policies, prioritizing accessibility and inclusivity over aesthetics. They promised to review all existing rules, consult with disability advocacy groups, and provide mandatory training for board members on fair housing laws. While these measures didn't erase the pain Michael had endured, they marked a step toward meaningful reform. For Michael, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt immense relief knowing he could move freely again. The simple act of rolling down his ramp and feeling the fresh air on his face brought tears to his eyes. It was something he'd taken for granted before the lockout. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the frustration of having to fight so hard for something so basic. Why did it take national attention and legal action to secure what should have been a fundamental right? Rachel, too, experienced mixed emotions. She was proud of what they had achieved together, not just for Michael, but for everyone who might face similar challenges in the future. Yet she couldn't help but feel anger at the system that allowed such injustices to occur in the first place. As she reflected on the ordeal, she realized how much work still needed to be done. This victory was important, but it was only one small piece of a much larger puzzle. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Rachel received messages of gratitude from people across the country. Many shared stories of their own battles with HOAs or inaccessible housing, thanking them for shining a light on an often overlooked issue. Inspired by the support, Michael decided to channel his energy into advocacy work. He joined local organizations focused on disability rights, using his experience to push for better protections and greater awareness. Meanwhile, Rachel continued leveraging her platform to highlight systemic injustices, determined to keep the momentum going. Though the lock was gone and the HOA had publicly apologized, the scars of the ordeal lingered, for Michael, for Rachel, and for the community at large. But amid the hardship, there was hope. The HOA's misguided attempt to assert control had backfired spectacularly, sparking conversations that reached far beyond their neighborhood. And for Michael and Rachel, the experience served as a reminder of the power of resilience, determination, and standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The ordeal with the HOA left an indelible mark on Michael and Rachel, reshaping not only their lives, but also the way they viewed the world around them. For Michael, the experience was transformative in ways he hadn't anticipated. Before the lockout, he had always been private about his disability, preferring to handle challenges quietly rather than drawing attention to himself. But seeing the overwhelming support from strangers across the country changed something inside him. He realized that his story wasn't just his own. It was part of a larger narrative about accessibility, inclusion, and fighting for what's right. Inspired by the outpouring of solidarity, Michael decided to step into advocacy work more actively. He began attending local meetings focused on disability rights, sharing his experience, and urging lawmakers to strengthen protections for people like him. At first, speaking publicly made him nervous. The thought of standing in front of a room full of people felt daunting. But as he spoke, he noticed how his words resonated with others who had faced similar struggles. Slowly, he grew more confident, finding purpose in helping others navigate systems that often seemed stacked against them. Rachel watched her brother's transformation with pride. She saw how the once reserved man now commanded attention when he talked about accessibility issues or called out discriminatory practices. It was as if the fight with the HOA had unlocked a new side of him, one that was determined, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge injustice. Together, they formed a powerful duo. Rachel using her media platform to amplify voices, and Michael working on the ground to effect change. Their bond deepened even further as they teamed up to host workshops and community events aimed at educating people about disability rights. For Rachel, the experience reinforced why she became a journalist in the first place. Throughout her career, she had exposed corruption and held powerful institutions accountable. But this time, it was personal. Seeing her brother treated so unfairly ignited a fire within her, reminding her of the importance of storytelling in driving social change. After the dust settled with the HOA, Rachel continued to use her influence to highlight systemic issues affecting marginalized communities. She dedicated segments on her show to topics like housing discrimination, accessibility barriers, and the need for empathy in policymaking. Her colleagues noticed a shift in her approach. She was sharper, more passionate, and deeply committed to giving a voice to those who often went unheard. The neighborhood itself underwent subtle but meaningful changes as well. The HOA, eager to repair its tarnished reputation, followed through on its promises to revise policies and prioritize inclusivity. New guidelines were introduced, ensuring that modifications like ramps and handrails would no longer require excessive approval processes. Board members attended training sessions on fair housing laws, learning how to balance aesthetics with accessibility. While some residents remained skeptical of the HOA's sudden change of heart, others acknowledged that progress, however overdue, was still worth celebrating. Perhaps the most profound impact was felt beyond the confines of their gated community. Michael and Rachel's story sparked conversations nationwide, inspiring others to speak up about their own battles with inaccessible housing or discriminatory practices. Social media campaigns gained traction, pushing for legislative reforms at both state and federal levels. Lawmakers took notice, introducing bills aimed at strengthening protections for individuals with disabilities. Advocacy groups reported a surge in membership, with many citing Michael's courage as motivation to get involved. Looking back, neither sibling could have predicted how much their lives would change because of a simple wooden ramp. What started as a personal struggle became a catalyst for broader change, a testament to the power of resilience and the ripple effect of standing up for justice. Michael often reflected on how far he'd come, from feeling trapped and powerless to becoming a symbol of hope for others facing similar challenges. And Rachel, ever the storyteller, knew this was one chapter she would never forget, a reminder that even the smallest acts of defiance could lead to monumental shifts. As they sat together one evening, watching the sunset from Michael's porch, Rachel turned to her brother with a smile. "We did good, Mike," she said softly. Michael nodded, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "Yeah," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "But there's still more to do." They both knew the fight for equality and accessibility was far from over, but they also knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together.